Hey everyone, and welcome to our September live event with National Quilter Circle. We have a very special guest with us today. We have Amanda Murphy. So I want to thank you so much for being here, Amanda, and I want to have you say hello to everyone and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello. Well, I am a designer in the quilting industry. I design lots of things. I design fabric for Tex, embroidery collections for OESD. I design quilting templates and rulers for Brewer Sewing under the Good Measure brand. I have a pattern line. I author books for C&T Publishing, and I am a spokesperson or expert for Bernina for the Q series, which is the machine behind me, as well as a sit down machine that I have in another room. So I do a lot when I teach. I also teach on domestics. So I guess I'm known as a teacher. Do a lot of ruler work. I teach a lot of free motion, both on the long arm and on domestics. So um, that's sort of what I do.
Yeah, that is perfect. And that is a wide variety of things that you are an expert on. So if people have questions on anything from, like you said, long arm quilting, sit down quilting, ruler work, designing patterns, selecting fabric, all of those things,
Mhm.
Amanda can definitely help you out if you have questions regarding any of that. So our first one that came in here is kind of a lengthy question. So I'm going to kind of split it up into some parts. Um,
Okay.
but, but KP says she's a new quilter and just finished a pinwheel quilt top. She purchased a somewhat stretchy backing fabric and plan on using basting adhesive, but I'm afraid I'll have issues with puckering or distortion with the stretchy backing during free motion quilting. So there's two questions to this. One, do I need to change my backing fabric or try using pins instead of that spray-based adhesive?
Okay, so I'm guessing it may be like a minky type of fabric or something like that. The key to not having puckering, etc., is to get your quilt really well basted to begin with. And then what I like to do is do a little bit of quilting everywhere and build up the quilting rather than quilting it to the depth in the center and smoothing out. Because the idea is when you pin your quilt, when you or you thread baste, however you baste it, it was square when you basted it. So the last thing you should do is go like this as quilting because you're going to pull it out of square. So I would say get it really, really well pinned or even thread basted, in particular with the stretchy back. If the stretchy back is going on a frame, you have to think of the orientation of the stretchy back. You would not want it with the stretchy fabric going front to back, so that you'd want the stretch going side to side, right? Um, so in a long arm, you have to think of that. And then also think about what batting you're using, because if it is like a minky, sometimes you definitely don't want a thick bat um, on something like that. Like you would probably want a thin bat, or I've even used no bat on that. But a thin bat because that is a thick backing. Um, a lot of times I like to pin my backs, but then still I thread base them, whether I'm either thread basting them on a sit down long arm or just by hand, because then you take the weight of the pins out and it becomes a little more maneuverable, but you're still going to have to baste it either way. Um, do you want to go on to the second part of the question?
That was part number one. The second part is the pinwheel centers have very thick layers, and I'd like to have to avoid sewing through them. So, you have any suggestions for a free motion pattern that is newbie friendly?
Okay, so um, it, the, you could do a bunch of things with either rulers or templates, right? Or with free motion and avoid going around that center motif. So if you think about it, um, you could decide to make marks on all the seams an inch away from the center and connect those to the pinwheel points instead of going into the center. The key is consistency, like, because if it looks deliberate if you do it several times, right? So I would make those points you're trying to connect, whether with free motion or with ruler work, connecting the corners to the points. I would make sure those points are out from the center instead of in that center seam. Because the other thing that happens with seams, in addition to just being difficult to sew through, they shift. They tend to shift on you. And when you have that many seams, it's hard to control that.
Yeah. All right. And the final part of this question is if you need to change the needle size or what your recommended needle size, kind of taking everything together. So if you are still trying to avoid that bulky center and have this maybe stretchy backing fabric, are you changing your needle or what?
You
Go ahead.
may be changing your needle. So the needle has to do with a lot of things. It has to do with the thread. It has to do with the thickness, the batting, right,
Mhm.
etc. So the needle, I usually start by looking at my thread, like how am I using a silk? Am I using an Aurifil 40 weight? What am I using? And then I would change from there. But it is going to be affected by the materials you're sewing with. That's why on a domestic, I always like to keep I hate to say like keep your scraps because quilters will keep like every little scrap, but like keep a sample sandwich or have some fabric on the side. Even on the long arm, sometimes I'll keep extra backing fabric and have scraps from the quilt on the side so I can both audition thread colors and I can test out tension settings and needles, right?
Mhm.
So it depends on what you're working on.
Perfect. All right, our next question here, this comes from Sherry, and she says, what would a person like me who is in the market for a long or mid-arm look for? What are some important features?
Okay, so I think one of the most important features, first of all, I would not buy without trying it because long arms are just like regular sewing machines. And you guys like know that a sewing machine you buy from a reputable dealer is very different than a one you picked up off of a Walmart. Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between a $400 and a $4,000 or a $40 sewing machine, right?
Right.
So the same thing goes with long arms. There's long arms at all ends of the market. And so you have to think what you're going to do with it. Are you using it just to do computerized quilting? Are you going to use it for free motion? Long arms feel different. So the first thing I'd look for is the feel of the machine as it moves. Is it easy to move? Is it adjustable? Does it have adjustable handles? Does it have adjustable controls? I like it with the Berninas, the presser foot goes up and down. How easy is it to thread? How do you change the thread tension? Because that's a big thing on some long arms. It's a big purchase. So you really want to look at, are you going to be comfortable with it? Can you buy a computerized system for it? How much is that going to cost? Do you want to buy it later or do you want to buy that now? I would personally buy the best machine you can initially rather than and then add features if I had to, because you're never going to get like what's the stitch quality of this machine, right? You're never going to be able to go back and fix that if you don't like it. So I'd make sure it moves really nicely. I'd try a bunch of machines. Shows are really good for that, and shows are opening up again. I would try a bunch of them before you buy so you're comfortable with your purchase. What type of needles does it has? Does it have a front load thread path? A, a bunch of things like that. I'd
Mhm.
look at all those things. And
Perfect.
think about how you're going to use it. Do you want to use it for free motion? You want to use it for computers? You want to use it for ruler work? What combination?
Yeah. I was going to do a little follow up real quick, just if someone is watching and they are maybe new to the quilting aspect of it as opposed to just piecing. Can you explain the difference between a long arm and a mid arm?
Okay, so there's there's all different machines on the market, right? Just like sewing machines, and it's a little bit of a it's a little confusing because like long arms can come in different configurations. So the machine I have behind me is what most of us think of when we think of a long arm. The fabric's on a big roll, right? And the machine moves. So if the machine itself moves. I have no fabric on the rolls right now, but the machine moves, and whether it's moved by me using the handles or by a computer. And that's what most people think of as long arms. Um, However, not this particular machine, but its smaller sister can also fit into a tabletop machine. And with that machine, you get some features. It's simply for quilting. So it's for layering the making the quilted design, not piecing, not traditional sewing, simply for quilting. But it has some advantages over domestics in terms of what it can do. It's still technically a long arm, it's the same machine, but then it's in a tabletop setting, right? So you have machines that go on frames, and you also have sit down machines. And then there's also like smaller systems where you have a domestic machine that's basically computerized that kind of rides a frame.
Mhm.
It's not going to have all the features a long arm has, but it's sort of like in between those products. So there's a whole bunch of things out there, and you really have to look at how you're going to use the machine. If you were going for a business, if you wanted to have a business quilting, the computerized system is invaluable because your bread and butter is going to be doing panographs for people because not everyone can pay for custom quilting, which takes a lot of time.
Mhm.
So, like if you told me you were going to do it for a business, I'd say definitely get this. If you said, well, I'm just an art quilter, I'm an art quilter and I just want it for my own work and I just want a free motion, maybe you don't need a computerized system. So you kind of have to look at how you're going to use it and just know there's all different machines on the market. I would say the feel, the way the machine moves is probably the most important thing on my list,
Yep.
personally.
Perfect. Absolutely. I just want to say we have many hellos. Mary in New York is watching, Norma in California. We have Teresa in Tennessee. So thank you everybody for joining us. Definitely keep getting your questions in throughout this throughout this whole hour. But our next question here, Ada asks, I just began learning free motion quilting and I found it difficult to maneuver the fabric around. I wonder what step I'm missing to keep the fabric from sticking to the bottom of the machine.
Okay, so your best friend is a Supreme slider, um, which is a piece of a Teflon that goes on the bottom of the machine bed, which makes it easier with domestic machines. It'll also help you if you either have a machine that's in a cabinet or a flat table. The key is a flat surface rather than usually the curved surface that our machines come with. A bigger flat table will help. When you get into doing more and bigger pieces, a lot of people will put their chair backs to the table so the quilt doesn't fall off while you're quilting. You can also suspend quilts. You could even have like a simple garment rack, right? And suspend clips from the garment rack to take the weight of the quilt off the machine bed. But my first I'd first start with that Supreme slider, get the biggest one you can. You'll look at it and say, well, like, why am I spending $70 on this sheet of Teflon? It is worth it. Like, especially, you can never go wrong with the Supreme slider. And we're talking domestic machines, right, for this question. But so I would say start with the Supreme slider, a flat table. If you can get some type of suspension systems. I know there are people in their sewing rooms who put like hooks up on the ceiling too. You could get really into it. So it really depends on what you're doing. But you could always use like a cheaper garment rack or something to take the weight off, or drape it over chairs, etc.
That's perfect. All right. Sherry says, thank you for answering her previous question. She wrote all of that down. And she says a show would be a great idea. So I think when she has the option to, she'll probably be attending a show to try out a machine.
That's why they're there.
Exactly. Yes. Bonnie asks, what is considered a normal price when looking for a long armor, not knowing what is too expensive?
So I'm assuming she's not talking for a long arm. She's talking for like
Oh,
long
the
arm
person doing the
services.
quilt. I'm
Okay, so
assuming. So if that's not the case, Bonnie, please correct us. But yeah, answer it that way first.
okay, so it can be all over the map because it depends on the type of work you want them to do. First of all, at the very kind of basic run, if you didn't want to spend, say it was a baby quilt and you just didn't want to spend a lot on the quilting, there was a lot going on, etc. Always the cheapest would be the least dense computerized design because that requires um, someone not they're babysitting the machine, but it doesn't require the intensity of a custom quilt. Um, and so, it varies depending on where you live in the country. Um, I want to say it's usually by the inch, and I want to say 2 cents per square inch, but I don't quilt for other people. I quilt my own stuff, so I'm
Mhm.
probably not the best to ask. But it could vary all the way up to like 10, 15 cents per square inch if you were talking really, really custom, right? Where the person's going to guide this quilt and put custom designs, whether they're computerized or not, in every area. You can have a wide range. So you go from very with the least dense quilting that's computerized up to medium, higher density. Then you would start with more custom things, like maybe it has a all over fill in the center, but a custom border, and then all the way up to completely custom. So you got to think of what time you put into the quilt, what type of quilting the quilt calls for, and like where you want to spend your money. Because some quilts, I get them off and I think no one's going to see the quilting. And then there's other quilts that I know I could transform with the quilting. So you got to think of that too. But it can be all over the map, and the long armors should be able to help you and give you examples like, this is what I charge 3 cents an inch for. This is what I charge 6 cents an inch for. They should have that information when you go and talk to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's sort of, I'm gonna call them additional add-on features too. I know, and I have a friend who does the majority of my long arm quilting for me, and I let her pick batting for me because she just buys it. She has rolls and rolls. I don't.
Mhm.
So she provides batting. Sometimes she'll provide backing fabric, and sometimes I will even have her bind them because I don't want to. So all of those things can be extra costs as well that go into
Right.
it.
And usually they're going to charge you a fee for the thread, but they will provide it. They
Right.
will charge you for the binding, but they'll provide it.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times you have to bring your own backing. Talk to your long armor because they'll tell you.
Yeah.
The best thing you can do for a long armor is give them square backing.
Yeah.
So that's going to cut down on their time.
Perfect. All right. Jackie says she has purchased a free motion sit down Juki machine. I'm new to free motion quilting and wanted to ask if it is better to start in the middle of the piece and work my way out or go top to bottom.
Okay, so I don't really have familiarity with Jukis per se, but let's just talk about domestic machines in general because I think that it's a sit down machine. So either domestic machines or long arms that are configured in sit down ways. The way I like to do it for the best results is I would get the whole thing basted first. Then I like to run around in a basting stitch, kind of in the binding area, about a 1/4 inch away from the edge of the fabric, because it makes it less likely that my fabric wraps around, my backing wraps around, it gets caught, although that still can happen. But I use long basting stitches for that. Then I go after, if we're thinking about a traditional quilt top, I go after the border. Um, so because from far away, that's what you're going to notice if it's not straight. So I do the stitching in the border. Then I start in the center block, if we're talking a traditional block. And I would do my stitch in the ditch or basic elements on that block. But then I don't quilt that block to death because that would be hard to smooth the fabric out. I go to the next block. I do all the basic elements. So I get the whole quilt top, all the basic elements, which is going to allow me to take out a lot of pins if it's pin basted, etc. Then I go back into the center and start with the dense quilting. That gets me the straightest quilts. But remember what I said before, I do not do that smooth out thing from the center. I have that you had it square, leave it, right?
Yep.
So I don't do that.
Okay, perfect. All right. Kayla says that she's always heard that long armors can imagine the final product and that you can put the designs in their hands because they are artists too. So along that same lines, how do you plan through what you're going to quilt? Whether it's going to be free motion or ruler, how do you pick the design that goes with the quilt?
Well, I look at the quilt and I think, are there ways to enhance the piecing with the quilting? And are you going to see the quilting, right? Because there are quilts that they're so busy you'll never see the quilting. But in general, I'm trying to enhance the piecing with the quilting. So, there's applique patterns where I'm going around the elements and then filling in the background. There's other, I don't know if you guys can see, here I'm playing with linear designs against curvy designs, etc. A lot of times I'm trying to bring out shapes that were in the piecing with the quilting, but also create contrast with the quilting. So curves next to straight lines, geometric forms next to organic ones, because that's going to really stand out. But in general, I do take a diagram of my quilt or a picture of my quilt. I take a Sharpie or some type of black marker and I make notes of what I'm going to do everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Because honestly, a lot of quilts have a lot of repetition and I'll forget what I did by the time I'm rolled down to the bottom. And I write out what I'm going to do when. So I sort of have a plan that I've done. That way, if I go away on a teaching trip or something and I come back, I know where I was because I'm kind of all over the place all the time. So I always do make plans, but a lot of times they're plans no one else could read other than myself.
So there, it's a secret code. It's a secret code you write to yourself.
Yeah, it's like a reminder list, right? But I use that opportunity to kind of work out my ideas and work out the kinks. So
Mhm.
if I have like a block, four blocks in a row that are all the same, I may draw a different design in each block and
Mhm.
just choose one. I work it out on paper first. Now, the other way I sometimes will do it, if I'm really unsure, is I'll draw the block on a solid piece of fabric and I'll actually quilt a block. Like I
Mhm.
don't repiece one, but I'll actually try to
Yeah.
quilt the block and
That's
work it
a
out
that's a
that
good
way.
idea to draw it on there. I never thought about doing that. It's a good idea. All
Because
right.
it's going to take more time to piece it, but I will draw, and it doesn't even have to be totally just like
Size.
exact.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'll draw it. I do tend to try out things, kind of audition designs a lot that way. But you also have to think the other component is which is more technical, is I want this quilt to lay flat. I don't care if my lines are a little off, but it drives me crazy if a quilt isn't flat, like absolutely insane, because it has to hang flat. I don't even care if like I screwed up this free motion. If I can't find it at the end, it wasn't a problem to begin with.
Mhm.
So, but I like it flat. So to do that, I have to plan for about the same quilting density throughout the quilt top.
Mhm.
That's how I achieve that. So I cannot go pell-mell on one block and have barely any quilting for the other and have a flat result.
Right.
So I am keeping in mind the density I want, and that density is determined. I mean, right now, over quilting is really in, and I like it as much as the next person, but
Yeah.
it is going to make your quilt stiffer. So it's probably not the best choice for a baby quilt.
Right.
So you got to think of what you're doing.
Right. Absolutely. All right. So Jasmine asks, she's always sent her quilts off to a long armor, but she's wanting to know if there's a small way that she can start trying out quilting on her smaller quilt machine, something like coasters, mini projects. Do you have any recommendations?
When I taught myself to quilt, I made like 10 bags, and the last bag was a lot more successful than the first bag.
Good.
And I gave the last bag to my mom because you always have to give the best stuff to your mom.
Mhm.
But that's how I learned to quilt. I just like, because with bags, no one notices. Like they're just so thrilled to get a bag, right?
Yeah.
No one, and no one but you really sees the mistakes anyway. So I think anything like that, placemats, bags, things you aren't going to be wedded to,
Yep.
like you're not going to, yeah, anything like that is going to be good. I mean, you can always choose loud fabrics, that hides things too,
Mhm.
but really it's about getting the rhythm of the machine, and kind of getting into a zone where you don't have to think as much. When you're learning how to quilt, it's hard at first because you're thinking of a lot of things. You're thinking of stitch regulation, or you're thinking, I mean, there's just tons of things to think of. But
Mhm.
actually, once you get used to quilting, you're not thinking so hard, and that's when it becomes easier. It's like you're listening, but it's more subconscious.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of, so you mentioned stitch regulation, and that is something that when we were talking about some of the features you might want to be looking for on a machine, can you explain a little bit what stitch regulation is, and or would you recommend it for somebody who is just trying to get into free motion quilting?
Okay, so stitch regulation first appeared. It was on Bernina Domestics, and that's what Bernina was. One of the things they were known for a long time is the stitch regulator foot, and what the foot could do. And I don't think it has. I was thinking, do I have one around here? It's built into that machine, so I can't take it out. But what the foot would do is it has a laser light, and it reads how fast you're moving the fabric,
Mhm.
right? And so it keeps your stitches the same length. So you speed up, if you speed up your hands, it's going to keep up with you. And that's what a stitch regulator does. Now, on this long arm, that is something to look for on a long arm. It makes your life much easier. It doesn't mean you can't quilt without it, but if you, on a long arm on a frame, if you don't have stitch regulation, you're going to be relying on yourself moving steadily,
Yeah.
right? You can't speed up, slow down. Um, so on the long arm, that foot, that sensor, there's two of them, and they're built into the base of the machine. So what that means is I have stitch regulation on the long arm, whether whether I'm using a ruler foot or whether I'm using a free motion foot, whatever foot I have stitch regulation on a long arm. And when I said that this in a table has some advantages over a domestic, it's the same thing. So a Q16 or Q20 from Bernina under a table has those same two sensors, which means you have stitch regulation with any domestic Bernina free motion foot. Now, if you do not have stitch regulation on a domestic machine, you can still use rulers and you can still use free motion. What you have to get used to is regulating your own stitches, right? So you have to get, and that, to be honest, I hear when I'm quilting on a domestic, I would hear it more than I would see it at this point. What you have to do is basically when your stitches are too long, there are three, well, let me back up. There are three things that control the stitch length. It's how fast you move your hands, how hard you push the foot pedal, and the speed you have your machine set on, right? So if your stitches are too short, you either need to let up on that foot pedal, move down the speed, or speed up your hands, right? I'm sorry, I said that wrong. If your stitches are too short, you want to, yeah, did I say let up on the foot pedal? That's
Yeah.
what you want to do.
Yep.
So usually your hands are the hardest things to change because we have like a natural speed we want to go. And some days we're going to be slower than others. So I always recommend starting in a practice clock to kind of get your speed down, right? But I usually let up or go down on the foot pedal. Some people, though, like to put their speed down and then floor the foot pedal, and then they'll have consistent speed. So it's about finding that right speed for you. And if you're on a domestic with rulers, you're going to be regulating your stitches. That's why ruler work and free motion are so related, because when you get the stitch regulation for one, you usually have it for the other. Like you, after doing ruler work file, you go back to free motion and it feels a little more natural, because with free motion, you're determining the direction, but the stitch regulation is the same, right?
Yep.
So that is something to look for, both on a long arm and a domestic, but it also doesn't mean you can't do it if you don't have it. You just have to be a little more skilled and practice.
Perfect.
Practice.
Yes, and I want to get back to ruler work in a second, but Tia has a question that just came in, and she wants to know, what are your favorite thread and fabric color combinations, both one that would be sort of more hidden and one that's really bold?
Oh gosh, I like everything. That's my problem. If you look at like fabric designs, this is Frolic, which is shipping next month. It has like navies with different bright colors on it. I could be convinced that I like any color. Honestly, I could, but I think a lot of times I work with colors that are bright and saturated, but like a little off. So it's like the green has like the colors are not gray, but they have a little more depth to them than just a pure green or a pure blue. And I probably like whatever I'm working on at the moment. So, like I have to draw a new collection. You have to think of a different palette. That's one of the things I like about designing for Benertex is they let me change, and I pretty consistently change. So usually I have a palette. These are typical colors for me. But like here's a different collection, and I have these typical blues and greens that I love. But then I threw in a few oranges to liven up the collection. I don't love orange, which is ironic. However, I use it so much because it goes with the blues and greens that I gravitate toward. But that's one of the things I like about quilting is you can experiment constantly and change your whole palette. It's not like you're repainting your whole house,
Yeah.
right? So I'd say my favorites are probably in the blue and green range, but I mean, I'll get involved with something else. The next fabric collection I draw, I don't think I'm going to have blues and greens, maybe a little green. Green's like a neutral for me because
Yeah.
in nature it's like a neutral. So I know like it
It's going to
appears
go
in
with
a
a
lot
lot.
of my stuff.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to go back and touch a little bit on ruler work quilting because you've mentioned it a couple times, and I think a lot of times if someone is not familiar with it, they think of rulers as the rulers you use to cut your fabric, and not necessarily the rulers that you're using. So can you explain a little bit
Yeah.
while you grab your rulers about what ruler work quilting is, and then also, are they rulers or are they templates, or can those terms
Oh
be
gosh.
interchangeably?
Okay.
One of
Brewer,
those
okay.
questions.
So I constantly call them, okay, so technically, rulers, Brewer would tell me, and Brewer is a sister company of Bernina, so they're all owned together, but they manufacture my rulers. And they are trying to oh, see, I just said it. They're trying to retrain me to say templates constantly. And I am constantly saying rulers. And I keep telling them it's because you call it ruler work, so it doesn't make sense. It's templates, so it's hard for me to remember. But they are adamant they are templates because they are inventory people and they like their templates and rulers separate. So here's the deal. Really, like our cutting rulers are rulers, okay? Um so something like just get the triangle and square I was using earlier. This would be considered a ruler, and a piecer is going to recognize something like this. Use
Something
it
with
to
inch
cut.
increments. Yeah.
Right. They have, yeah, inch increments because we're driving the rest of the world crazy with our English system of measurements. And um, so that is what rulers are.
Yes.
Okay. What happened in the quilting world is long armers discovered, hey, since I'm hand guiding this machine, if I had a table on the machine, I could take a piece of plastic and make a really long curve shape, like you see scallops on a quilt, right? Originally, those were made by long armers who were looking for a way, how do I do a straight line on a long arm if it's not computerized? Well, you use like a thick piece of plastic and you guide the foot along a piece of plastic. Technically, these are templates. And the reason why they want to call them templates is because they don't want someone using this thin piece of plastic on the machine, because the machine, a long arm is a hopping foot machine, and it can hop right over the thin plastic onto your and you could damage your machine. So technically, the pieces of plastic that we quilt around using a ruler foot are technically called templates. However, it's ruler work with a ruler foot, so it's super confusing. But if Brewer is watching this, they will be like, no, templates. I will send them this link later and they can laugh at me, but it's true. So a lot of people do use the terms interchangeably, but technically these are templates. What you have to know, and this is my every circle template, this is my every angle template. These are basic shapes, and I have lots of others. And there's features that are designed into these where when you quilt and a circle and then move over, the lines on the template go over your previous stitching lines. There's lots of things you can do with templates, but what you have to know, whether you're on a domestic or a long arm, is the thickness of templates that you need. So on some domestics, on long arms, you have a hopping foot, as I said, so the motion of the foot goes up and down. You need the thickest template, which is a long arm thickness. It's 6 millimeters thick. You need this so you don't hop right over onto your template, because that is an expensive mistake. However, on domestics, it's a little easier with Berninas because all Berninas that take a 72 foot can take long arm templates, and it's advantage of that brand, right? But on almost every other brand, it's model dependent. So if you tell me I have a Baby Lock, or I have a Janome, or I have whatever, a Viking, I can't necessarily tell you what thickness ruler or template you need. You need to check with your dealer, because on a low shank machine where the foot just like snaps on, it is very likely that you will not be able to get a long arm thickness ruler behind the foot of the machine. And you absolutely must have it be able to go around like behind the foot too, because I need to sew around this whole circle and I'm not going to rotate the fabric while I do it. I'm just going to move the whole thing. So the foot has got to accommodate the thicker ruler. If you have a low shank machine, that means you need a low shank ruler to go with it. And because my following is very much dominated by Bernina, most of my sales are all long arm thickness, because even the domestic Berninas take the long arm thickness. However, you might have, say you have a Bernina domestic and a Viking domestic, but the Viking is low shank. You have to have low shank rulers to work the Viking. So you could be in a situation where you actually need two sets of rulers. Say you have a long arm, but you have an older baby lock that may not be able to take the thicker rulers. You're going to have two thicknesses of rulers because you absolutely cannot use thinner or templates. You're not going to be able to use the thinner ones on the long arm. So you have to know your machines. Your dealer is your best friend for this. You got to know what thickness you need, because no one at a show, if you buy at a show, is going to ask you what you have. They're going to figure you know what you have.
Yeah.
Right. The other thing I'd say is for any brand, certainly for Bernina, but really for any brand, if the manufacturer makes a foot for ruler work, I would buy the manufacturer's foot. I know for Bernina, they have a safety mechanism. It's a spring that basically prevents your needle bar from colliding into your foot that you wouldn't have if you used a third-party foot. So if your manufacturer makes it, even if it's an extra expense and you've had a third-party foot, I would buy the manufacturer's foot.
Right. And if someone's watching this thinking, well, I already have a free motion foot on my machine, why do I need a ruler foot? What is the difference for
So
that?
I probably have a ruler foot. Yeah, I do. Okay.
Oh, and I do know that Bernina's model is the easy clip-on off feet
Right.
exchanging. So that's why you could do
Right.
that.
And I'm showing you, this is actually, I have the domestic foot on my other long arm machine because Bernina's long arms can take domestic feet. So this is the long arm version. It doesn't have the spring. I would never put this on my domestic Bernina. But what you can see here is the profile. Do you see how thick the bottom of the foot is? That's what you want because it has to ride along the edge of the template. So you don't want it to be thin. You could crash it into the bar and that can create a lot of problems. And then in addition, if you have a hover feature on your domestic machine, you need to turn it off when you're doing ruler work. A hover feature is the thing, like if I'm piecing, when I stop, my foot goes up a little so I can feed more fabric into the machine. That you want totally off, because the last thing you want is to be pushing this in and have the foot come up.
Yeah.
Right? So if you have a hover feature, you need to turn it off.
Perfect. So all sorts of things to take into consideration if you want to get started with template quilting. All right, our next question here. Cheryl asks, how do you cover up a big mistake when long arming? Can you take the stitches out?
You can if you want to. It's a pain to take stitches out. I don't take a lot of stitches out, not because I don't make mistakes, but because I'm like, I'm on to the next quilt. It depends on what it is. So when you're long arming, if you have a huge mistake, you know you're going to take out later. Like you literally just went with colored thread into a white area. Okay, what I would do personally is I'd go back and secure the stitches right before the mistake, right? So do like a little bit of back stitching or whatever right over those stitches and continue on. And then later just take out the offending stitches. Because otherwise you're going to have to go back and secure those beginning stitches later anyway. Now, my personal thing is if you can't see it at the end, it didn't matter. But I don't do show quilts. If I did show quilts for a living, I probably would take out more stitches, but I don't. I do fabric and I do promotional stuff for my quilts. But I mean, my thought is when you have like something this busy, and I don't know if you guys can see the quilting on this, like it's pebbles. I don't know if I can get, okay. No one's ever going to see your mistake. So it's so busy. And the other thing is, if I was really I'm not going to do the most challenging design in contrasting thread. The other thing you can do is get fabric pens, fabric markers. You want acid-free fabric markers. If you have a lighter thread, you can cover up your mistake with just a little fabric pen. Do not use a Sharpie though. You could use micron pens. They don't come in a lot of colors, but Fabrico makes a lot of colors of fabric pens. And usually if I'm going to do like a navy blue and white quilt, I probably have a navy fabric pen just to cover up some incidentals. Don't use Sharpies. They're not acid free and they will eat into your fabric. Right? So you'd want to, someone asked about color wheels.
Yes,
I don't know about color wheel. I have no idea who makes the best color wheel.
I was going to say, I don't know if we have necessarily brand recommendations of color wheels either. And so I was going to do a spin on that question in that if you are someone who is wanting to maybe use a color wheel because you're not confident in colors, how can you sort of tell people how do you match your colors? How do you decide what colors you're going to put,
Okay.
that kind of
Well,
thing?
there's the strategy in terms of fabric design, but there's also the strategy when you just choose quilts in a quilt top. In fabric design, you have to think about scale, you have to think about colors, you have to think about how they're going to work and different color combinations you can get to make different looks, etc. But just like, I think the best friend, if you're not um, sure about color, your best friend really is fabric store, because there's so many feature prints where color combinations are already figured out for you,
Hmm.
right? And like, let's look at this as an example. Um, Clearly the blues are dominant, but I'm using the orangish yellow across the color wheel, and that's going to have a lot of impact.
Hmm.
So a lot of times also, like, I'll create other prints that have bits of those colors in them that will make a cohesive quilt. So, the best thing for a beginner sometimes is to choose something you really love, a fabric you really love, and then go around the store and try to find coordinates. And as I said, I'm not a fan of orange, but look at how I used orange in here. Just keep in mind those colors that pop, those colors that you have to be strategic about where to use them. So if I had an all blue quilt and put in some orange, I don't want to put it all in one spot because it's really going to stand out from the blue.
Hmm.
Whereas if I had an orange and pink quilt and it was all those warm colors, sort of like a print with this quilt print as inspiration,
Hmm.
that orange isn't going to stand out as much because it's not contrasting with the rest of the quilt. So, but to get back to what I would do is choose a print you love and draw colors from that. And the best thing that happens, or one of the best things in quilting, is you get like little surprises that happen because fabric is like the ultimate paint box, right? It already has some surprises that happen. And that's what's fun about quilting. You pull in this print, oh, there's a little hint of that, and it can get you going off in a different direction, which is really the key to thinking like an artist. Like, most artists are waiting for happy mistakes to happen, right? It's waiting for that and being really willing to derail your plans because you drew something. Like, I'll draw a collection and have it in my mind to draw, but a lot of times it won't look like that at the end
Hmm.
because I've gone off on another area. So being willing to do that with your piece is important as you progress. And also sometimes it's fun to make a quilt in colors you don't like just to see what will happen.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of times I love the result that happens with the warmer colors that I'm less drawn to. But
Hmm.
remember, it's a quilt, so it doesn't matter.
We'll
It's
see.
it's like,
Yeah,
it's
you might
not
find you like a color that you didn't think that you did like in the beginning. So,
right. And so it's like, you can take more and more risks the more confident you get.
mhm.
I guess I don't stress about it too much because I know what I'm drawn to in the fabric store. Sometimes I'm drawn to things that are totally different, from my normal thing, and I just want to do something that's a different style.
Yeah.
Um, but that would be, I'd say, even more than a color wheel, because you can get really strategic about, I have to use complementary color, is
Right.
looking at a fabric in a store and seeing why you like it, right? Um, if I looked at this print, that olive green would not, it's so yellowy, I
Mhm.
wouldn't normally be drawn to it. But I am here because it's against these cool tones. So it's going to be a lot more lively than if I had used like lilacs instead of yellows,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm. Absolutely. So, if you want additional information on color, color wheels, just color in general, in terms of putting together your quilt, we do have a free download that everybody can access. It is on the banner of the page you're viewing this video on now, and it is our color theory download. So that'll give you a bunch more follow-up information on color that you can use. Our next question here, Norma asks, what type of quilt design would you recommend for a beginner?
Um, if you're just talking like free motion design, and I'll get back to ruler work in a minute.
Hmm.
A free motion design, the thing I'd recommend is probably loops. I feel like they're a little easier than stipples because you don't, like, you can mask your mistakes at the base of the loop. Like, there's a, so stipples or meanders, the challenge is there's no natural stopping point. right? Because there's no corner.
Yeah.
And so sometimes people don't know where to stop. Now, where I tell people to stop is usually in the flattest point of the curve, so you can tell where you're going when you start again, right? But with the loop, you can stop at the base of the loop, and if you go off another direction, it's masked by the base of the loop, and you don't have to worry about not crossing over your line. So that would be, I think, the easiest free motion. In terms of ruler work, maybe just straight lines. And the reason why I say straight lines or overall pattern of some sort, like I have clamshell rulers, I have ribbon candy rulers, but I say straight lines because that's the motion you normally sew in. And you got to get used to going side to side and up and down. It's very directionless when you're basically unlearning quilting when you're doing ruler work or piecing, because you need to be directionless. That's why a lot of times kids, even with their small hands, are really good at it because they don't they don't have those ingrained motions that they think they should be going one way or another way.
Yeah. I love it. That's awesome. Jan asks, so follow up back when we were talking about the pins and you were using it. When you say you draw on your designs before you quilt, do you mean you draw on the fabric? Can you kind of touch on
No,
that? And then with the pins?
I draw on a picture of my quilt, right? Um, I try to do as minimal, and this is another thing that's good about um, rulers. I try to draw as minimally on the fabric as possible. Um, if I can, I draw with white chalk, like those chalk liners.
Yep.
I try to draw as minimally as possible because I don't want to have to get it out, and God knows what's going to happen. And like none of us really know what these chemicals do. But the good news is we won't be around when things happen to them. So there's really nothing to worry about there, right? They won't make us sad. But I try not to do a lot. So the nice thing about the templates is you can line them up with points on the quilt and you don't have to draw the line. Like it's just, when you use templates, it's less marking than when you use a walking foot. Of course, there's other things walking feet can do that templates can't. So they're different things, but that's one of the things I like. I mark as little as possible. Like for this little petal, I'll mark the center of the petal, but not anything else. And I'll just go from corner to center, from corner to center.
Mm-hmm. Well, so and then the other thing you mentioned when you were talking about drawing is you were saying you have a square of fabric and you would draw your piece.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes like to really test out a design if I'm unsure, I will draw kind of the seam lines just on a scrap of fabric I have left over from something, or even I could piece, the backing you always have extra of. I could piece a bunch of strips into extra fabric. It's something I don't care about, and I'll just draw on the design, just with my cutting rulers, not templates. I'll draw it on and just experiment with it that way.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. All right, so we're getting towards the end of our hour here. So if anyone's holding on to any questions, definitely go ahead and get those in now. We have another one that just came in, and Jasmine wants to know, how difficult is it to create an image with long arming? Example, say like a Santa on a tree skirt.
It's the same thing, it's strange because I do go from domestic to long arm quite a bit. Domestic, you're moving the fabric. Long arm, you're moving the handlebars. And see, I'm hooked into the computer system right now. Let me just, okay. Now, it's really getting used to moving this. So it's different than when your hands are in the fabric. Now, one thing that I like is I can adjust these handlebars. Remember when I told you to look at your different adjustments? They can go up or down or whatever. So because I was a domestic quilter before I was a long arm quilter, a lot of times when I'm doing that type of work, I like the thing to have my handlebars down closer to the fabric, but then if I'm doing something else, I might have them up. It really is practice, just like on a domestic, because you are learning to kind of draw with your hands up like this. So it just takes practice, and then also you can computerize things and have the computer stitch it out, right? So sometimes I'll do a combination. The Santa, you could even buy a Santa, right? Plop it on the tree skirt and then free motion around it. I always think computerized designs look better when they're contrasted with the human hand, because there's just a quality that the human hand has, like with all our inconsistencies that I do think quilters will look, people will appreciate.
Mhm.
And so I like to take the more sterile but perfect computerized image and surround it with um, not hand quilting, but hand guided quilting.
Yeah. So follow up on that. So if you are someone who had purchased the long arm or mid arm or something that doesn't have that computerized capability, have you ever combined, say, embroidery with quilting? So
Yeah, so computerized quilting, you could certainly use like I have a Bernina 770. I could certainly use my embroidery machine. You just have to think about the order you do it, right? So you want the quilt still, you want it stabilized really well before you start embroidering in the hoop. So you want all that basting already done.
mhm.
And then you could pop the designs in an embroidery hoop, and then you could go and still free motion around it. I like that type of work that combines those different type of things, but just make sure, because the hoop is going to cause shifting if you don't baste it well, make sure you're well basted.
Yeah.
Okay, if you're going to do that.
All right. Liz asks, what quilting design works best for strip quilts?
Well, you could, it depends, how much time do you want to spend on the strip
All
quilt?
right. Oh,
um
okay.
you know I could picture, if you wanted to go really really simple, you could certainly do straight lines, kind of, if you had diagonal strips that are just, they don't even have to be right on the strips, they could just kind of accentuate those line works, right? Or you could do free motion in some of the strips and let other strips be puffy.
Mhm.
It depends on the scale of the strips too. Like, are they really, really tiny, or how many seams are in there, or are they big enough that you could put like ribbon candy in? Or if you're not comfortable with ribbon candy, substitute that could be for loops, like letter E, letter L, letter E, letter L.
Mhm.
Because you have more experience drawing that, because of or I guess anyone over 20 probably has more experience drawing that. But
Yeah. Okay.
um, a lot of times handwritten shapes um, work well for that too.
So along that lines, because you did mention just now cursive and cursive handwriting, do you recommend that as a way for somebody to practice getting used to the movements of some of these designs?
Recommend doodling,
Okay.
because it teaches your brain where to go next,
Mhm.
right? But it's still not going, like, I have a lot of students who think because they doodled here, it's going to be perfect when they get on the fabric.
Yeah.
That's not the case, especially on a domestic where you have to learn to move the fabric underneath.
Mhm.
The doodling helps you because it helps you solidify the design in your mind, but you're still, the best way to learn to quilt is practice like 15 minutes a day. If you have a smaller machine, have it set up and just do little practice sandwiches, not to do like 6 hours in one day if you're expected to be perfect when it's done. Because
Mhm.
it is like handwriting. Like, you wouldn't teach someone to write cursive 6 hours in one day,
Right.
right? We learned like over years of just doing a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. And what you really need is for that stitch regulation and the movement to become more natural. So all you're thinking about is the design.
Mhm.
And to me, that, like, it works best for me if I have a podcast going. It's or music, something to take your left brain away and have it stop being judgmental. Because the worst thing you could do is be like quilting and looking at a mistake you made 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
That does nothing for it. You need to be looking at what you're doing then, and
Mhm.
not not like fixating.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we have a fun comment here. Kayla says that she loves optical illusion quilts when the lines mess with your eyes. Those are interesting, and I would imagine that could be a fun way to hide some quilting too if it's already
Right.
messing with your eyes with the design.
Just
But then Becky wants to know, when do you use a walking foot?
okay, so I have a 7 series Bernina. I have two 7 series Berninas. And they're dual feed machines, so sometimes I use the dual feed too. But like, say you wanted to do lines of waves,
Mhm.
right? Like just gentle waves, like a modern quilt,
Yeah.
that would be something your walking foot could do. Say you wanted to do like just zigzags,
Mhm.
right, down a quilt, or your walking foot can still do specialty stitches. The other times, sometimes, like if I was doing all the outlines of a block, it would be faster for me to do that with a template, because I wouldn't have to rotate the quilt at every corner. But if I was just doing straight lines like all the way across the quilt, I certainly could choose a walking foot. I could do that with a template or a walking foot. So, when I don't have to change directions a lot would be one key, or when I wanted to use like a serpentine stitch would be another time.
So then we've talked a little bit about the direction or the way that you quilt. You do a little here, you do a little here, then you come back. If you're going to do something like a straight line quilting, would you always start at the top and go to the bottom, or would you go down and then turn it around and come back up the other way? Do you need to change direction in terms of
I
freedom?
do change direction because otherwise, personally, I would end up with a diamond quilt. Now, we're talking domestic for this when I say I go around. Long arm, you obviously have to have top down. You can do multiple passes if you want to do the really dense quilting on a second or third pass. You could do that, but you got to get enough quilting that you don't get folds of the fabric on the bars. However, for a domestic, um, the I would I would still want to hold, if I was doing a bunch of straight line quilting, I would still want to hold to the principle that I get a little bit of quilting everywhere before filming in. So I might do, and painter's tape can be helpful with this, quilt a line every 4 inches, all going one direction, and kind of um, unrolled and even feed it over my shoulder might be how I do it. Then I would change directions and subdivide that area into 2 inches. Then I change directions again and subdivide that area into another. That's going to be the quickest way for me to get it done. Um, so I basically have a line every 4 inches, then every 2 inches, then every inch. What that also enables you to do is decide when to stop, right? And because you'll know. But the worst thing you could do in that instance would be to do the middle line and then a line a 1/4 inch one way and a 1/4 inch the other way and a 1/4 inch the other way and a 1/4 inch the other way. I get a lot of people who send me pictures of that because you get a bow tie,
Yeah.
right? It just like it because you can't absorb the fabric. So I find it squarest if I still hold to that. What is my preferred method of basting?
Yes.
Should I go on to that?
Absolutely.
Um,
You're taking my job right away from me, though. So
Sorry, I like read it in the thing. This is, you know what? Next time we need to do this without me wearing glasses. I won't be able to see a thing.
perfect. All right. So
Um,
Allison, yes. What's your preferred method of basting? Is what she wants to
well,
know.
I have a lot of Berninas. I have
Mhm.
more Berninas than I have cars, right? So, if I was doing a sit down quilt, I would probably hop on over to the Q16, which is the little sister of the Q24,
Mhm.
on a domestic in a sit down setup. So I have it in a table and I can set it on 1 stitch per inch and it will baste.
Mhm.
So that's probably what I do now. But um, prior to my having these machines, when I was learning to quilt on a domestic, I did do pin basting. I did do spray basting if I was really for time, but I prefer the pin. I think my favorite method was actually hand basting with a water soluble thread, because just long stitches, because it was
Mhm.
weightless.
Yeah.
But now I would do that on my Q16 sit down.
That's perfect. Awesome. And I do want to point out too, we do have on National Quilter Circle, we have a fun little video that I did on the Q16. It kind of highlights some of the fun features. So if you want to see that machine in action, we do have that as well. And of course, you have a bunch of videos yourself, Amanda, on obviously using all of these Bernina machines that you were talking about and demonstrating template work, ruler work, quilting, whatever we're going to call this now. So can you tell people, because we're wrapping up here now, but tell people where they can see your work too and see some of the demos that you have done.
Yeah, so my website is blog.amandamurphydesign.com. I have a YouTube channel, but the other thing is I have a very active Facebook group. So that's Quilting with Amanda Murphy. I have a page and a group. And usually the first and third Thursdays of the month, if I'm not traveling at 11 a.m. Eastern, I get on live and give little mini lessons and answer questions there. So a lot of times, like, I'll rotate what I'll do. I'll quilt with rulers one week, or templates, and then I will do like tips on batting another week, etc. And the most recent episodes get posted, but then I take them down after a few weeks. But Quilting with Amanda Murphy on Facebook, on Instagram, I'm terrible at growing my Instagram, but it's Amanda Murphy Design. Um, So it's again all those places. And if you have like if you contact me on Facebook and I don't answer and you have like a specific message for me, use the contact form on my website. Sometimes on Facebook it's easy to miss messages if you're not logged in as your business versus your personal page. But the contact form on my website goes to my email.
Perfect.
So
Awesome. So yeah, everybody can check you out if they want more information on everything that you are doing. And I want to thank you so much for being here with us today to
thank
answer
you.
everyone's questions.
Thanks for having
And
me.
hopefully we'll have you back again later on.